Hello, everyone. Welcome to Quantum Healthy Podcast. Today we have Tristan Scott with us, and I'm going to introduce him. I've been a big fan for a while, and has a master's in electrical engineering and is deeply passionate about health, nutrition, regenerative agriculture, decentralization, and Bitcoin. He is also the author of the book Bitcoin and Beef and founder of the outdoor apparel company Wyoming Based. He is the head of operations and marketing at Daylight Computer Company and hosts a podcast called Decentralized Radio. Did I miss anything?
I think that's it for now. Yeah, great. You got it all.
Awesome. Well, I just want to let everybody know I dressed up for you today. I am wearing a hand knit, naturally dyed, sourced wool, and I absolutely love that you have. I've been following the company for a little while. I have not bought a piece yet, but I will because I want to buy my first piece in Bitcoin. And so
There we go. Yeah, it wasn't even intentional, but I'm wearing our sweater right now because I'm warming up. I just jumped in the river an hour ago and
Okay.
for some cold exposure, and yeah, it's really nice. And I keep going further and further down this just deeper connection with nature. And clothing is there, food is there,
Yep.
obviously our entire electromagnetic environment, and yeah, it's really fun, rewarding to have kind of little side projects that try and bring this to the forefront. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, how does an electrical engineer go from the centralized education to becoming a hunter, an author, a podcaster, health consultant, and all the things that you've been doing in this space? Why don't we just start there?
Yeah, it's definitely a non-traditional route, I would say. But to preface, even before I had my major inflection point, I am very fortunate. And as Laura brought up pre-show, my mom is from Austria, so I did not have a standard American upbringing. I had, a very outdoors, whole foods based, eat every meal, cook every meal at home sort of upbringing. And I'm very thankful for that because that really set a foundation, even if I wasn't consciously aware of how meaningful that was to me in my early childhood and younger years, because I clearly and unsurprisingly deviated from that as I got into my teenage years and into college, when you stop hanging out with your parents and go on trips with them, right? But it really set myself up to have this perception of the world. Of course, traveling, when you're young, gives you experience to a lot of different items and cultures and standards of quality. And going to Austria in a small mountain town where my mom grew up, just being outdoors all the time, really fresh food, fresh air, and being in nature really was my favorite thing to do. And we would grow up going skiing and hiking all the time, and I didn't even realize it, but those were always my favorite moments growing up and as a child. So when I did have this kind of, complete change in direction of my life, when I suffered one too many concussions when I was about 21 years old, I didn't realize how much of that really had been lost in terms of my day to day. When, again, I went to university, I went to college, studying electrical engineering, I played soccer. So I was just busy, and all I did was study and then focus on soccer. And if I had a day off and I was a college kid, and I would go out partying and the one day a week that I could. And that was pretty much my life for 4 years. And then, yeah, suffered one too many concussions, really did everything wrong in the acute recovery phase, like the 2, 3, 4 weeks after the concussion. Didn't really know I had one. So I did not heal. I did not recover. And I went from being this, very high functioning engineering student and college athlete to not being able to exercise, being very sensitive to any sort of stimulation, noise, light, sound, having to sleep 12 hours a night, all the classic like post-concussive syndromes and symptoms. And, after 3, 4 months, I finally got a neurologist appointment, which took forever. And they really didn't help me at all. They finally confirmed what my suspicions were at that point, that I did have some sort of post-concussion symptoms and syndrome. And then I was like so excited in one moment, and the very next I asked one question: what can I do to get better? And they said, just take it easy and slowly work back into the routine of your life. But I had already been trying to do that for 3, 4 months, and I knew right away that that wasn't the solution. And I became really depressed and sad that, I'm 21, 20, 22 at that point. How could this be like my new normal? So I really was in a bad spot, but then thankfully had a summer internship, and the semester that I kind of struggled through was about to be over, and had a summer internship actually in Portland, Oregon, where you're at. And as you know, it's a very like outdoors based kind of lifestyle in Oregon. It's a beautiful state. And my roommate kind of got me back into camping and hiking. And I noticed when I was out in nature on the weekends, not on screens, not on technology, not on my engineering internship, I could do more, even though, let's say, I wasn't sleeping some absurd quantity of hours or had the ideal environment in terms of recovery. But I just could go for hikes and would be less fatigued afterwards. It wouldn't wreck my week and didn't have as bad of daily headaches, etc. So that gave me some momentum. And then I kind of just came to the realization that I could heal myself. And I really started just researching and reading. And I went down a lot of these, self-healing rabbit holes and consuming YouTube videos, podcasts, like the original like biohacking space, Ben Greenfield, self-help, like brain healing books really moved the needle for me in the beginning, because I just came to the conclusion that if even I could get 10 to 20% better, that would be a world of a difference. And then I did. And then I looked back and I was like, well, if I've gotten 20% better, I can get 20% better from here now. And I just kept stacking momentum by doing that and changing lifestyle habits, focusing on sleep, focusing on stress reduction, experimented with some supplements. I was taking like fish oil and CBD, which now I know about DHA and brain health. And I started, I bought a pair of blue light blocking glasses in 2018, even though I had no idea about, blue light or circadian rhythms impact on biology. And it just kept going from there. In 2019, I was grounding and turning my phone on airplane mode. And, I just became obsessed because I healed myself. I started feeling better. And I wanted to, as a young man, I graduating college, going out into the real world, I wanted to be passionate and learning about things that really mattered. And I graduated and I realized, well, two things that are pretty important to get familiar with and educated on are your health and your wealth. And both of them kind of took upon myself to learn about, health optimization through my own healing journey and then beyond. And then simultaneously was also getting very passionate about Bitcoin. And then 2020, COVID happened, and I was primed to have that perspective and cemented my entire kind of just the way I was thinking about the world at the time, and, doubled down on both items, and really just decided to put myself out there on social media and continue to learn, and ended up writing a book and, meeting all these people. And then, of course, I came back eventually after I got very enamored by the food system and regenerative agriculture, and wrote my book about that and Bitcoin. I realized there was this unique opportunity and gap in the health space to talk about the electromagnetic aspects of our biology. And I would hear and see posts and people talking about EMFs and, light, and talking about, frequency and wavelength, and, talking about pendants and weird things. And I kind of was like, these folks have no idea what they're talking about. Like, and I realized that there's a fundamental gap in the education around physics and all of these components in terms of the, a traditional medical schooling route and a traditional schooling route for anyone. Like, physics was optional where I grew up. I took it, of course, but most people don't understand the basic fundamentals. And I was quickly realizing that I had this opportunity to kind of go deeper on all the things I knew about. Again, I had been blocking blue light and grounding and, being cognizant of EMFs for years at that point, but I never went super, super deep on the research and the mechanistic side of things. So I decided to do that for the last 2 years and started my podcast because I just wanted to talk about these topics that I thought no one was talking about, and ask the researchers directly. And that led me to a lot of connections, got, bigger on Twitter by talking about these items, and then eventually interviewed my now CEO founder, and led me to Daylight Computer. So it's been a wild ride these past 6 years, 7 years, but my one too many concussions is the best thing that ever happened to me. And it shows that when you put yourself out there into the world and really are just trying to kind of keep progressing and moving forward with a strong vision and North Star at your core, that a lot is going to come your way in a positive manner. So it's been amazing.
So awesome. It sounds like you really, I mean, you really touched on compounding health,
Mm-hmm.
because I would say that your brain is a Ferrari now and that you are 100%, if not more than 100% healed at this point.
It's funny you mentioned that, because there definitely was a point where, like 3 years ago, I did feel like I was getting back to like my baseline fully, like, which would have been like 2 years after my concussion. And then I definitely noticed that overall, maybe not cognitively, I used to just be able to memorize things like insanely well when I was in high school and all that stuff. But overall vitality, I noticed in the past couple of years, just by continuing to compound and by continuing to get closer and closer to a more connected lifestyle in terms of nature, that I just kept feeling better. And I eventually surpassed how I felt before my brain injury. And again, I
Cool.
had kind of anecdotally experienced that myself by just improving year on year. And then now I know all the reasons as to why that's the case.
Yeah.
That's incentive for people. Yeah, because we all want better brain health. Yeah. Oh man, I just want to comment. We had on our last podcast Kelly Bento, who's really big in, she's a quantum hygienist, we call her, and we're big into red light therapy. And she's talked about this several times, where she says to get into this space of quantum biology, it's either by curiosity or crisis. And I feel like in your case, it's such a mix of the two, that you had the concussion, and then you just, that this curious electrical engineer just went down all the rabbit holes, and look where you've come out. It's just, that's amazing. So congratulations. We want to go 4 ways with this podcast interview. We were joking beforehand, but seriously, we would love to go down a Bitcoin rabbit hole with you. We'd like to go down a decentralization rabbit hole. We want to go down an EMF, a non-native electromagnetic frequency one. We're going to try and hold ourselves back on that, because we really would love you to come back, Tristan, and do a full episode on that, because you are, I think, gifted at explaining, merging the biology, with the physics so much better than many of us. I feel, and I joked ahead of the podcast, that you're like my brother from another mother, because I don't know if you realize, but my background was, I studied physics and physical oceanography. But my first 2 years, I went to military college and we take 2 years of general engineering before we then take our next 2 years, which we pick our specialty. And I didn't really feel I had the engineering brain, so I left it, went physical oceanography, which I know you, in your world, you know a whole lot about waves. Well, my degree was literally studying waves. It was not this sexy, jump in the ocean and scuba dive like people think it is. We took one biology course, one geology course, but the rest was all physics. And I struggled with the electrical engineering courses that I took. So, is it true you have a master's in electrical engineering?
Yeah. I got a bachelor's and master's in 4.5 years. And I would say, like, I was really good at like math and the
Yes.
coursework, but I don't remember a lot of what I was
You and me
taught. I can
both.
tell you that. And I went directly into, again, why I'm good at explaining and speaking on the technical side, because I went right into the semiconductor industry as, someone focusing on the business side of engineering, more so product marketing management, which was, again, I'm more outgoing. I know I have better communication skills than like 99% of electrical engineers. So I
I
realized
understand that.
that, and I wanted to be kind of the middleman between the technical and the product, and also the sales and the business and the customer, because I like to talk to people. And that kind of has given me a good ability to discuss and understand things at, the key takeaway, the key overview level. But I mean, electrical engineering is basically 5 years, 4 years, 5 years with a master's of just absurd like levels of calculus. Like everything
Mhm.
turns to calculus at a certain point.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you gave me a bunch of equations to solve right now, I'd be struggling very hard as well. So
Same.
it's really those fundamentals, like, what wavelength wavelength is, and just understanding kind of the thought process behind certain items, that I think is really helpful, and just key units and terms that are very foreign to anyone who's never, been familiar with these things. I think that's the most helpful. But I would say the last item to touch on is, it's really funny because when I was studying all this stuff, like, I didn't care at all about electrical engineering. I thought it was like, all right, I'm just getting a degree, it'll pay well, and I'll figure out what I want to do with my life later. And then I was like, oh, I kind of like the business side of engineering. This is working. But then now I'm like going back and learning about the more technical side, especially the electromagnetism piece, which is very much, quite challenging and abstract in nature. And I find myself far more passionate about electrical engineering now than I did at any point in my career and any point in schooling, which is kind of funny. So I'm just thankful that it kind of worked out this way. And you become a much better learner when you're passionate about something.
Oh,
Yes,
100%.
100%. Well, let's get into the big topic today, which is the one we want to focus on, which is the daylight computer. Can we just start with, tell us about the inventor, if you could? I know he's been on different podcasts. Can you tell us, do you know a little bit about his story and where
Yeah.
how did he come up with this idea?
Yeah. My CEO and founder Anjan Kata he's brilliant as well. And obviously, if he's kind of done what he's accomplished with daylight,
Mhm.
and he had kind of a similar issue to a lot of folks nowadays. They really had a negative relationship with technology, but for him it was at a much deeper level. And he had a family of doctors, and thought he wanted to impact the world positively through the medical device route or medical technologies, but realized kind of indirectly that something perhaps more important is how we're interfacing with these devices we have in our lives every day. And they're really a source of ultimate distraction, and kind of becoming more and more detrimental with each passing year. And he had this foresight back in 2017, 2018, and he like suffered tremendously with ADHD and seasonal affective disorder in the winter. He's an Indian grew up in Canada, so the light piece
Oh,
there
okay.
is very mismatched with his biology evolutionarily, and he suffered from that. But he realized one day that he had such a negative relationship. He was locking all his devices after a certain time in one room, but his Amazon Kindle never felt like it was taking from him, and it was just there as kind of a tool, a neutral piece of the environment where he could read and not be distracted, and not be giving something to this device as opposed to everything else, like an iPhone or an iPad, etc. And then he realized the screen interface was the main difference. So he went down this rabbit hole of studying screen technologies and displays, and realized that the Kindle uses electronic ink, which is actually a third-party company itself, and it's completely different from your standard LCD or OLED screens you see everywhere else. But they had this kind of limit in terms of what it could be used for, because the refresh rate is too slow to be used for anything really aside from note taking and reading. And that's why a Kindle has never been anything more, and the e-reader market has only stayed as e-readers instead of e-paper tablets or e-paper computers. And he thought, well, maybe there's something there, and he went down rabbit holes and realized that there had been a recent breakthrough in a similar or potentially similar screen display technology from these Japanese researchers. And he reached out to them and started working with professors and a few from, I believe, the Netherlands as well. And their whole goal was to create a faster refresh electronic paper like feel of a display. So you get the benefits of a Kindle screen where it's low stimulation. You can use it outside because it's reflective at its core, and there's no eye strain, and it's black and white. There's no stimulating colors, so you're not getting a lot of the stimulation and also disruption to your biology from that component. And simultaneously, his father is like a big like Jack Cruz like follower and preacher of like all of these kind of health tenets. And so he was very much aware of circadian rhythm and circadian health at the same time, or at some point in the journey. I don't know exactly when. And yeah, he developed a prototype with these professors, and it took a few years, and then in, I believe, 2020, 2021, just spent all of his time trying to convince manufacturers to give him a chance. And he has a pretty crazy story where he was in Japan like multiple times and was just trying his best to get in front of someone important enough to like convince their company to give them a chance. And he had a few really like extremely like 1 in a million chances happen to actually get in front of the right person, who happened to be connected to the professor that he was working with. I believe the executive at the company may have also been a professor at that university, if I remember correctly. So it's just a serendipitous story, but also is like meant to be. And eventually he got the contracts down, and simultaneously is raising money in Silicon Valley from angel investors who have enough money and want to invest in healthier technology for the future, because they've worked in this space for decades and made their money and millions there. But they realize that the whole industry is centered around more screen time, more stimulation, as opposed to really being focused around productivity and getting the most out of humans cognitively from an output perspective, and just being a tool instead of, what I like to say is like a portal. So he just kept going, and it's 5 years. The company has existed for 5 years. He started it 6 years ago, almost 6.5 years now. And it's just kind of had a lot of up and downs like every startup, but it's culminated in the right team. And again, I podcasted with him the first week of January of this year, after Dr. Cruz introduced us or told me about him. And halfway through the podcast, again, I had the foresight where I just left my electrical engineering job, in the semiconductor industry, and I was floating around consulting and, podcasting, but it was like, I feel like I have a lot more value to add to a really important mission. And I knew that my lifestyle was dialed in. This time last year, I eat the hyper local, most nutrient dense food. I get outside, I work outside, I'm grounded, I'm getting tons of sun, sleep's on point, but I'm just spending so much time on technology and, mitigating EMFs and mitigating artificial light. It's really a pain because there is no alternative at all to the current set of devices that we use. And every year that goes by, I can even remember in college, like, I was in college not too long ago, and it was not this pervasive. It really, I think, shifted during COVID, where we spend so much time, like the vast majority of our waking hours are spent staring at screens. And even when they're not directly in front of us and we're looking at them directly, they're there somewhere in a car. They're the navigation. Like, you're at a restaurant, there's a TV on, like they're quite literally everywhere. And we're just being assaulted from every direction, from the artificial light and the non-native EMF perspective, and it's unavoidable. So halfway through my podcast with Anjan, I realized that if it was what he said it was, and they're about to launch their first product, that this was by far the most important company in the entire world to succeed. Because I knew from an engineering perspective, like, tell me to fix lighting, I can fix lighting in the entire world. I can make all lighting healthier. It's not that complicated. I could fix screens. Again, this stuff is solvable from an engineering perspective. Flicker, all these things. It's really not that complicated. EMFs, radio frequencies, that's a bit more complicated, but it's still, once you acknowledge the problem exists, we can solve them. But the fact that someone had been working on this for 5-6 years already, I knew the barrier to entry, because I worked in the semiconductor industry, electronics. Like, if you're a low volume, small guy, nobody cares about you. You're going to get ripped off. Like, making it in this sort of space in hardware, in electronics, consumer electronics especially. I mean, think of how many new like companies have come out in the past 10 years in this realm. Almost none, like no household names really. Maybe, like Remarkable has done really well. And that's, again, similar type feel, but it's also Apple, it's also Google, Samsung. And that's the core. And that's like so centralized, so top heavy in terms of the industry. So my biggest like wow factor was the fact that, he was already going to market in a matter of months with his first product. And the whole tenant was built around healthier technology, a circadian friendly screen. And the starting point to what he was saying is we want to become this generation's Apple, but centered around health, wellness, and productivity. So I dropped literally everything I was doing. I had a call with him the next day and was like, I'm going to work for you. Like, you don't have a choice. And I know I have the skill set. I know I have the network and the passion to make this a success and drive this to where it needs to go. And we're going to change millions of lives and do this thing. So yeah, it's been an incredible year.
I
You
was
bet
going
you
to
are.
ask you how you got that job, and you just nailed it. Awesome. I love that story.
Oh my gosh.
Can't make it up, That's why you need to trust, because there was a point where I left my engineering job in September and, I didn't know. I was actually about to work for a Bitcoin company. I was simultaneously interviewing with Swan Bitcoin, which is an amazing company. But I was like, I don't want to manage IRAs and financial products. Like money, to me, money is easy. Like buy Bitcoin and do what you can and have side hustles and all that and know about the money being broken. But I don't want to sell financial products. And I have all this knowledge in the health and electromagnetic space of thought. So yeah, worked out. Trust the process.
Yeah, you kind of touched on, how technology ruins health, but I think some, our audience does have some knowledge around blue light toxicity and, what this is doing to our health. But I'd love for you to explain it. And also, I I can't remember if I told you this at the beginning, Tristan, before we were recording. I have a background in addiction. I'm a licensed addiction counselor, and there you actually on your podcast you have, I can't even remember what it's a commercial for, but it's you speaking. And I heard it a long time ago, and I knew blue light was addictive, but the way it comes out of your mouth, you're like, and blue light is addictive by design. You say it just like that, and that stuck with me like for a long time. Just the way you say it, because it's true. It is addictive by design, and we need to say it that in that way, because I think a lot of people don't realize that it is, and we don't have to go like down, like an MK Ultra rabbit hole or anything like that, but
We
like
could.
touching on the addiction piece would be helpful too for our listeners.
Yeah. And honestly, I'm not really a huge fan of going super conspiracy theory, because I don't even think it matters. Like
No.
we're here. It's clear that they're, designing these things to be addictive and hyper stimulating and the best, visual experience. And again, that the best visual experience comes along with like this high level of isolated blue light and, addictive nature, that it's all synergistic and synonymous, really. So it doesn't even matter if there's like a deeper kind of narrative at play, because that's the reality. And they at least know that that's the truth. Like everyone's in agreement that the entire business model of big tech is to get you on screens longer, get kids on screens earlier so that they're using devices for their entire life. Like that's, I think, agreed upon. And
Wow.
it's something that is really just a byproduct, I think, of technological evolution, but also realizing that light can be such a stimulation in terms of an input signal to our biology, right? And the thing I like to compare everything to and go around to conferences, this landed pretty well, is it's quite literally like a thing about a Las Vegas casino. It's, it completely devoid of natural light. You have all these bright flashing lights everywhere. You have other, addictive substances like alcohol that they give you for free. And, if girls walking around with barely any clothes on. And then you have the game itself. So most people, most parents, most, consumers think the root of the problem is really in the game or in the video or the TikTok or the YouTube channel. But that's only one piece. It's really the entire environment that is making us so much more susceptible to falling prey to pulling the slots constantly and desensitizing our dopamine from so many perspectives. And it's the same thing with your screens and your technology. It's keeping you inside, so it's devoid of natural light, just like a casino. And then you're getting a screen that is extremely high in, blue light, which is far more stimulatory, and also flickering, which is another stressor. And it's devoid of the balancing wavelengths in the infrared and the red spectrum as well. And overall, it's a very unbalanced spectrum completely. And then we have, of course, the software interface as well, the notifications, which was just, coming up from my phone here, the tabs, the content itself, the 30-second videos, the framing in and framing out, all that stuff. But if you get rid of all of that, in terms of the hardware interface, if you have a monochrome, a black and white screen, you're going to be a lot less, likely to be doom scrolling or to be just on the device, constantly like falling down these unproductive rabbit holes. And then let's say it's black and white and you bring it outside and you have natural sunlight, we're going to be even less likely to kind of fall prey to these dopamine traps and desensitizing your receptors and your reward system. So it's the entire environment that big tech companies have kind of maybe inadvertently or maybe purposefully created that's detaching us from reality. It's detaching us from the environment that we're meant to be living in and taking as input signals. And that's really making us the ultimate victim and the highest, retention user in terms of the artificial environment that they want us to be in. So I think that's something that, and maybe people think that's obvious, but for me, I think there's a lot more there because it's not always kind of dawned on like the hardware interface, the screen itself, and the light itself. And it's always coming down to the content or the software. But I can tell you for sure, if you're scrolling on Twitter and it's black and white and you're outside, you feel like you're reading a newspaper as opposed to just being like sucked into this, very stimulatory kind of news feed or hyperbolic interactions.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like with the social media, like the likes, the comments, all those things to a gambler is the unexpected, whenever the unexpected is going to come, which is that win. And actually the research shows that there's even a more like the losing and the putting in the time is actually more addictive than the waiting for that. So when we talk about that to the equivalent of somebody sitting on a screen, like there doesn't need to be anything. Like it's just that stimulant coming, that blue light. And also there's just in the last, so in 2015, there was 23.2 million people that had a diagnosed substance use disorder. And they normally don't do these research studies. Like they usually they're like a decade apart, but because of COVID, we had one. And and just in that short amount of time, which was like a 5 or 6 year time span, it is jumped to over 46 million. So what explains that? Like, I know that it's a light story. I know that it has to do with this. So when you say that this computer is going to save a lot of people's lives, it's going to do that, like plus it's going to go beyond. And there's so many people that need it.
And we're at like, a breaking point, right? Like our bodies are very resilient, but we're just, we're pouring it on with toxins from every direction. And you're seeing that, right? You're seeing the repercussions, and you can pull the same statistics from 2013, which, is where that smartphone era like took off, and especially children and teenagers, mental health and suicide rates and depression across the board. And that's where I'm really passionate about, because, you can say what you will about the adult generation and everything. And a lot of us, I was lucky to not grow up on a smartphone. I was like the last, years of, I think I left high school right as I got my first smartphone. And it really is completely different when you grow up just using this technology. And we know from just knowledge of electromagnetism and how it's affecting children, they're far more susceptible, like not even like twice as much, three times as much, like depending on their age. Young infants and 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds could be 50, 100 times more susceptible
Oh,
because they're
wow.
smaller body size and they're developing biology. And
Yeah.
that is really setting us up for failure in the next generation. So that's where we think we can have the biggest impact. We know we can have the biggest impact if every parent realizes there's a healthier alternative. And schools are one-to-one learning. Again, this is a relatively new thing since COVID. We just all shifted to one-to-one learning and screens. And don't get me wrong, you can be very productive and you have the world's universe's knowledge at your fingertips. But at the same time, we've never been, more distracted, more stimulated, and kind of have worse mental, cognitive, physical health as a result of that. So it's really a two-edged sword that is kind of cutting us very hard as a society. And I think we're plateauing in terms of developmental sake, and it doesn't have to be that way. But yeah, the blue light, kind of your original question, right? The blue light, people don't realize how stimulating blue light is, and it's by design, right? Like blue light is amazing. I think people should recognize that when blue light is consumed in the right context, like when you wake up first thing in the morning and go outside, you are getting blue light in your eyes, on your skin, and that is what's waking you up in the morning. That is what's stimulating cortisol. It's providing wakefulness. It's giving you that rush of energy, and it's telling your body it's the morning. It's setting your circadian clock. It's the main, Zeitgeber, time giver, and it's so important. But it's always balanced, right, with the rest of the spectrum: the yellow, the orange, the green, the red, and most importantly, infrared, which is the majority of the sunlight spectrum. So you're never
Yep.
getting blue without the red and infrared. But it's really important. So I think that's where this context, this nuance, and these articles will debunk blue light blocking glasses or blue light screen filters or any blue light, demonizing, because they're like, well, it's in the sun. It's like, yeah, but it's completely different. And I think even it's important to remember that and understand how different our environment is being indoors in front of screens versus outdoors from many different perspectives. But yeah, there's not a ton of like super compelling studies on like blue light and dopamine directly, but there's some dots you can connect, and also just common sense of knowing that it's far more stimulating than and higher energy than any other wavelength really in the visible spectrum.
Yeah. All right. So you mentioned remarkable. I actually have a remarkable much before I ever learned about daylight computer, but I'd love for you to sell us the daylight computer. Why is it different than the remarkable? And what are all like just what are some of the highlight things that come to mind for you?
Yeah, and I've never used Remarkable regularly, but I was honestly, I'm not gonna lie, shocked at when I first kind of experienced with it. And we filmed these head-to-head videos, that
Mhm.
a product which is so like limited in its functionality actually has done so well. And it actually kind of speaks to the timeliness of people are really hungry for a distraction-free device or something that they can just set everything else aside and have a moment where it's just like their notebook that's digitally convenient and write or read. But yeah, the Remarkable is similar to the Kindle, very similar. It uses the exact same screen technology that I mentioned earlier called Electronic Ink, which is a third-party company that they license to Remarkable to Amazon to use on their displays. And that screen is part of a greater category called electronic paper, which is, as you can imagine, screens and display technologies that feel like paper. They're monochrome, typically, meaning black and white, but they have that paper like feel to them. And they're mostly used for reading and writing. And they're great because that type of screen The e-ink screens are reflective, and that's why you can see a Kindle outside in the direct sun really well and remarkable. So instead of emitting light via a backlight or via, LEDs shining through, you are working with nature by reflecting the sunlight or the light in the environment, if you're indoors, back into the eyes of the user. And that's important because that's how light works in nature. It's reflective because there's not really a source of light in nature outside of the sun, some, crazy bioluminescent animals or phenomenons, and then fire. And that's it. That's all we have. Everything else, the pine trees outside my house, the brown grass now, it's reflecting light from the sun. So it's plants are green because they absorb everything else and then they reflect green. They also reflect infrared light as well, as we know, but
Yeah.
it's how it works in nature. So the reflective e-ink screens are amazing because that's how nature works. It's a much more natural experience than what are you consuming when you're outside? You're consuming continuous, no flicker happening from sunlight, and then you're getting outside, of course, and the battery life's incredible because you don't have, LEDs to power, which consume a lot of the battery and all these limitations. And you don't have to bring a charging cable. It doesn't overheat as much because you're not driving these LEDs with a lot of power. And you can read outside on the beach. Your Kindle lasts, your Remarkable lasts like days. And it's amazing. And, some of them have backlights. The Remarkable 1 and 2 do not have a backlight. I think their new product does, but it's typically really nice because you're just eye strain free pretty much and able to use it outside and just have this distraction free experience. So they marketed everything to knowledge workers and really deep work, and it's done really well. But if you try to do anything outside of taking notes and like reading, even if you try and zoom in and out on a PDF, that it's a really bad experience because the refresh rate is horrible. It's like
Yep.
2 to 6 frames per second, and it'll be super laggy. Like you can't go on the internet and just load a page on any of these products. It'll take a full like 3 to 4 seconds, which in 2004 maybe would have been okay, but in 2024 that's like unacceptable, right? We need immediate refresh rates, immediate download speeds, and that's what we're used to. And we're throughputing a lot more data now than we were back then as well. So that's where these products fall short, and that's why, as I mentioned, they've stayed as e-readers and note takers, digital note takers, and that's it. So where the daylight computer is different is, and again, these were inspirations for Ungen for us. Like we love them, and we're happy they exist because we think that's like a major stepping stone and still a useful product. But we want to have that type of interaction and send emails and go on Twitter or just research, a vacation or research the weather. I don't know, whatever. Google Docs, typing. You could do all of that on a similar with our display technology. So our display technology is called Live Paper. It is not e-ink at all. It's actually LCD based, but it is reflective at its core. So you still get the benefits of using it outside because it's a reflective screen. So during the day, you can go outside and use it in the direct sun. The battery life is also incredible. And, it's not going to overheat as easily as well, which is really nice because my MacBook will quite literally implode if it's sunny and 70 degrees or warmer. So that's not great. And at nighttime, we thought, how do we make the nighttime experience the best as well? And that's where the real like customization and creativity came, because we custom made a backlight to be 100% blue light free if you toggle it to full amber mode, and also redesign the circuitry to control the LEDs to have zero flicker, which is, my opinion, the most underrated negative stressor in our environment is flicker. And people don't realize that all LEDs pretty much are flickering, fluorescence as well, for different reasons. But just because of a pure electronic design standard called pulse width modulation control of LEDs, especially when you're changing brightness, is the reason for that. And you could take a slow motion video or just a picture of any screen and you see the distortions, and kind of that's basically capturing flicker in real time, because these LEDs are changing in amplitude hundreds or potentially thousands of times a second, which you can't visually perceive, but your brain can. And it's a major stressor, and pretty much agreed upon in engineering and in scientific literature, saying that flickering lights causes, anxiety, it causes epileptic episodes potentially, and then most importantly, eye strain, migraines, and tremendously can aggravate symptoms of autism, which is a whole nother major important audience in the neurodivergent space that is growing at a scary rate. But we decided to just get rid of that because we don't need it. It's an engineering change, and we decided to design and prioritize that. So our backlight is zero flicker, can have zero blue light, and it has a broad spectrum of light. So this is where your audience will understand. If you're wearing blue light blockers, if you use F-Lux, Iris, or just your iPhone or MacBook screen filters, you can get rid of all the blue light. Yeah, but you have to turn it on full red mode to do that. And then guess what? You can't even see anything when you do that, right? Like, it's a
So
terrible
true.
visual experience. It's
Eh,
and it's straight
It
up
is.
dangerous in certain scenarios. And then you're also doing nothing to the flicker because you're not changing any of this at a hardware level. So we have the luxury to change these things at the hardware level. And what we decided is an amber spectrum of light, which has a tiny bit of green, more yellow, a lot of orange, amber, red, will be a much better visual experience. And then you can actually have it on very low brightness. So the thing that people don't realize about disrupting circadian rhythm, disrupting melatonin, is it's not just blue light is like, the end all be all. And blue light is like one photon of blue light is going to disrupt your circadian rhythm and no other light is going to do anything else. It's not true at all. It's all about the intensity and the spectrum as kind of a combination. And yes,
Yeah.
blue light can disrupt your melatonin 3 to 4 times greater than lower energy wavelengths such as orange and red. But if you have to turn the orange and red up 4 or 5 times in brightness or in intensity, you're pretty much evened out. And the hard thing that no one realizes is our eyes are actually designed to be far less sensitive to red light and longer wavelengths. They're far more sensitive to like a green and yellow at nighttime. And if you sprinkle in just a tiny, tiny bit of green and more yellow, you will actually perceive the light to be brighter, even though the actual brightness and intensity is, equivalent to, say, something at the same level in a pure red wavelength. And that's important. And guess what? There's no red isolated light in nature. It doesn't exist. There's no isolated light in nature at all. And what I mentioned earlier is there's only the sun and there's only, fire as pure like emission sources of light. Like, yes, like plants are green and they're emitting like a very basic, green spectrum, but they're only green when the sun is out, and then you get a full spectrum of light. If you look at the spectrum of fire and a candle, you get everything from green, and you probably even get a tiny, tiny bit of blue, depending on the, intensity and temperature of the fire. And you get more yellow, more orange, more red, and a ton of infrared. So our spectrum is like the first half of fire. And on the next generation products, we want to add infrared LEDs in there to really make it like a campfire spectrum so that you can really get the best potential version of light at night, which is the least disruptive to your biology and your sleep, which we know, especially today, as I mentioned, we're being attacked by all these toxins from all these different directions. Sleep has never been more important because that's when you restore and repair from the day's cellular damage. And that is, the item that we're really failing at doing in today's world with all of these, artificial lights and artificial electromagnetic inputs and highly, stimulating devices that we're staring at to and past, proper bedtime.
So Tristan, what do you do at night then? Do you, oh, you've already obviously got the solution, but let's say we don't have the daylight yet. We're saving our money. We're going to get it in 2025. What would you do at night in terms of blue blockers and red screens? And are we still doing the best that we can?
Yeah,
Like,
and it's tough,
yeah.
right? Like again, these are all I love blue blockers. I love red
Mhm.
screens. I mean, my screen is always somewhat tinted orange, and I have the triple click shortcut on my iPhone and red LED and red filtered incandescents. I at nighttime again, it's the whole environment that matters, and I mean, I use like candles and just very dim incandescents
Yes.
and, red LEDs occasionally at nighttime. And I try and just do the best in that regard. And, when I get close to bedtime, my screen does go on kind of like close or full to red mode as possible, because that is the best option right now. And yeah, it's tremendous to have that ability, but it's important also to recognize that again, these are band-aid solutions, and
Right.
we can really address them at the root cause of their problem when we're the ones making the product. Like, Apple, I mean, Apple and all these companies, they have the standard night mode on most tech products. It does not have no blue light. It actually has like a good amount of blue light. So it's just like they act like they care, but they don't at all. And again, for a company like Apple to minimize flicker and make a better night mode and make more shortcuts available, it
Mhm.
would be so easy for them to do these things. Like, it's not that hard, really. It's hard for a startup to do it, but it's not impossible, and we're doing it. But it would be even easier for a big company to do it, but there's no incentive really. And then they're almost exposing themselves at the same time to say that, oh, blue light's really bad, or like screens are flickering and pretty bad for you. So sorry for the last 15 years, but now we're
Yeah.
better. So it's tough, but yeah, that's what I do. And
Eh,
just also try and find a routine which is kind of destimulating and relaxing at
mhm.
nighttime, which I struggle with. I mean, I'm working very hard, very late sometimes, and it's hard to wind down. But if you have the ability to cut all devices like a 2 hours hour before bed and just separate it and read a book, or take a nice shower, bath, or talk with your loved ones, then that's the best thing you can do. And start a fire, whatever makes you kind of feel comfortable and safe. That's probably the best sleep routine. And that's just life advice. It's not biohacking, I think.
Big question is, does the daylight as it is now, does it reduce non-native EMFs? Is it that in the design, or is that coming?
Great question. And I will say right now at the hardware level, there has been nothing done to optimize EMF exposure at the hardware level. Now, that's not to say that there's things we can do to reduce exposure on a software level. And then there's also just some inherent benefits of the product itself. So I would say that the first thing, and something again that's low hanging fruit for us to do when we launch our 1.0 of our operating system, is something called like smart airplane mode, to where like right now my daily computer is sitting next to me on my desk, and it should ideally just be in airplane mode because I'm not using it. But unless I manually put it in
I
airplane mode,
know.
it's going to be pinging the Wi-Fi network. And if it was a phone, most people have their phone on Bluetooth, on cellular data, on Wi-Fi on. So they're getting three different, radio frequency signals pinging every 5, 10, 12 seconds. That's how often RFs, they're very pulsed in nature. So they're constantly pinging the network. Even if they're not connected, or even if they are connected, there's still some sort of pulsing signal going on regularly for no reason. Because guess what, if you're not using it, do you really need it to be connected to the network? Unless you're downloading something in standby, no, you don't. So that's what we're going to implement very soon as a software level change. And try and think about clever ways to where, oh, if you're just note taking, or if you're just reading something, then it'll just be in airplane mode by default. And you might, have some customization ability with that. But then of course, if you're able to use a device outside, your EMF load outside is almost always going to be lower than inside because you're not very close to electrical power, electrical wiring. Wi-Fi networks are typically weaker. Like I go and work at the park in my town, which unfortunately, but fortunately has Wi-Fi. So it's good if you take advantage of it. It's not if you're just like, without consent getting hit by Wi-Fi. But in general, it's way, way lower intensity than if I sit in a coffee shop where 20 other people are working, or if I'm in an office setting, or I'm at my house with all this electrical power and lighting and all of that as well. So that's another angle. And then, yeah, we technically have a weaker Wi-Fi chip. So I think the signal may be not as strong at certain distances. But yeah, what's really exciting for me, being a major, part of the future of daylight is that we really started with the screen and the light, the visible light component. We think that, again, it's the lowest hanging fruit. It's pretty easy to solve it. But now what I like to think about is how do we solve wireless technology? How do we make radio frequencies not be so detrimental, or is there a solution? Hardwiring is great. I actually, I'm hardwiring my computer right now, and I have like an Ethernet splitter and all this stuff, but it's a lot of work. It's very inconvenient. I mean, even like setting up your internet to be hardwired, it's a pain. And we live very kind of mobile lifestyles to where it's probably not realistic for most people. So is there something in between, or is there a version of wireless technology that is less detrimental? And I don't know the answer to that. I would like to think that at worst case, we could do a better job of, shielding and filtering out various frequencies inside a consumer electronic product, and, maybe having a more targeted radio frequency Wi-Fi signal going out. But maybe there's something even more there. So that's where I'm get really excited, because this is like uncharted territories. And I would say anyone who is listening to this, or anyone in your network, if you're an electronics engineer or a radio frequency, any experience in RF antenna design, like hit me up. Like, let's talk, let's brainstorm. I want to hear all the ideas. I have a lot of them about how we could potentially make a tech device much safer. And, one idea, again, just off the bat is, you could put a sensor on the product to where, if it senses it's within an inch of your body, it just turns off all RF outputs, or it just goes dead completely, or with just a standby current or power on or standby, right? There's so many things you can do. And I want people to also understand that your phone is not just bad because of radio frequencies. There is so many different frequencies, EMFs coming from your phone. There's static magnetic fields, there's power supplies, there's microprocessors switching at, frequencies in the radio frequency range. There's obviously a cell chip, there's a Wi-Fi chip, there's a Bluetooth component. There is a lot. And if we can even bring down that by, 50%, then that could help a lot of people without them ever having an idea. And that's kind of the goal.
Are you hinting that daylight's going to be doing a cell phone in the future?
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not going to be next year or this year, but it's certainly the next, product on the roadmap, maybe a V2 of the tablet form factor, and then a phone, but it's certainly the most requested item. It's what I want very badly personally. And yeah, but I think something we also need to consider is that the right way forward? Like I was thinking about today, I think the smartphone form factor is the absolute worst for human interactions. It's the most prone to like addicting you to whatever you're doing, or sucking you in, because it's just so convenient. And I was like, I have a MacBook, I have my daylight computer, like, do I really need a smartphone? I actually don't think I do. All I need it for is to occasionally call like a, you know, a business for like delivering my vanity or texting my dad. I could text my dad on WhatsApp, which I can do on my computer or my daylight computer. And then I was like, well, maybe, oh, I really just like it to take like a video or a picture of
No.
stuff when I'm out. But, you know, I don't need a smartphone to do that. And I don't need a smartphone to call like a random business. I could have a regular phone for that. So
A
something that
VoIP phone.
Anjan has brought up, he's like, what if you just had like a tablet, a laptop, and a watch or something, right? Like, or a new device that is just more synergistic. And I think that's what we need to make sure we check ourselves on, is not just to fall into the same exact, you know, holes and cookie cutter approach that the current tech companies have, because it may not be the best way forward. And there's a lot happening with, you know, productivity and AI and language models accelerating just, you know, what makes sense from a learning and, you know, access to information perspective. So who knows? But as of right now, I don't think that stuff will change that rapidly. So we probably will definitely do a phone in the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, Arthur Furstenberg, he'd be proud of your thought process on that, because he really feels cell phones are killing the world.
They're bad. Yeah.
Really.
Arthur is cool. I would like to connect with him, but I always tell people, just, you know, an EMF tidbit is like, you can freak out about your entire environment, but your cell phone is like 90% of like your
No.
exposure. And it's not even close. If you change the way you interact with your cell phone, that is by far the biggest lever to pull.
We're gonna
Oh,
bring
good
you
tip.
back. Yeah, we'll bring you back and really talk about that and flesh that out.
What are the products that you offer right now, that so people know? What do you have?
Yeah. So right now we just have the Daylight Computer 1, which lighting angle is kind of tough here as the sun is starting to set in Wyoming, but it's a tablet form factor, 10.5 inch screen. And yeah, it's what we started with. So we started with a tablet because it's kind of the most versatile. It's the easiest from a design perspective. We can go smaller and, you know, add a cell chip in the future, do a phone. We can go bigger, do a monitor. You know, we could add a keyboard, do a laptop. But the tablet's nice because, again, that whole space of like e-readers is almost all tablets, and it's great for note taking. It's the best form factor for reading and note taking. And then it's versatile. Like, you can text on it, messaging. I do a lot of messaging on there, and then you could connect to keyboard. So it has a USB-C port. So if you're cognizant of EMFs, you can hardwire in a keyboard and get a multi-port adapter and keyboard, stand, mouse setup, and it works really well. I love it for writing, actually. I mean, most of the work I do is like spreadsheets and Google Docs and emails and social media. So I can actually do a ton of my work on the Daylight Computer, and I really think it's a game changer for first thing in the morning when you're first getting online, and then of course right before bed, if, you know, of course you're tied to your current device suite. But yeah, it's been out since May, and we sold out kind of 4 weeks after we launched, 5 weeks after we launched. We had a little flash sale for Black Friday, and now we're back to only taking $100 deposits. I don't know when this podcast will come out, but we're hoping to be back on like full priced pre-order sale sometime in the new year, and, you know, mid to late January. So yeah, it's quite incredible, the response that we've had. And yeah, we're just getting started. So I think I never had a tablet before, and I am very thankful that I have a Daylight Computer in my routine. I take all my notes during meetings on it. I send emails on it. I go on WhatsApp, Slack, Twitter. I'm on a little bit of a social media break right now for the rest of the year, but I would say it's a much different experience going on Instagram and going on Twitter on your Daylight Computer than on your phone, and that's powerful.
Ah,
What's
yeah,
what,
absolutely.
what's your role with the company, Tristan?
Right now, I'm head of operations and marketing, so I'm doing
Wow.
a lot of different things, but it's fun. It's a good time.
Wow, congratulations. My goodness.
Awesome.
Uh, yeah.
Okay, well, we are at our time, and I want to ask you our signature question before we wrap up and thank you. What does quantum healthy mean to you?
Quantum healthy. Yeah, I love it. I think it's great. What it means to me, I think understanding that at the lowest level, our biology is running off, electrons, protons, and photons is so important because I like to say that it's electromagnetic at the lowest level. It's quantum at the lowest level. It kind of means the same thing or very similar, but it's so important to realize that because I think that's the biggest frame that is missing from modern society, that our electromagnetic environment, which means it's interacting with everything in our environment and the fields of nature and man-made items, it's all having an impact on how we feel, how our biology interacts. So if you can kind of improve that environment to be more synergistic with the way we evolved and more connected to nature, then you can become the best version of yourself. You can augment your experience as a human, and ultimately that means you can be quantum healthy or healthy on a quantum level, and that every interaction that you have is also impacting that because of the phenomenons of quantum physics, such as quantum entanglement. And that's something I've really realized, is that when you put something out there in the world and you truly believe in it, and the energy you bring to the world every day with the people you meet and interact with, like, that is what you get back from the universe, from the world. And if you just think about that frame, no matter what you're doing or where you're at in your journey, you will make progress, and you will be far happier with your experience on this planet, because that's the way energy flows in the world and in the universe.
Awesome. Thank you.
That was epic.
Answer.
That was an epic answer. Oh my gosh. I was taking notes like crazy. That's a good one.
Thank you both so much.
Oh gosh. Okay, your offerings, just to make sure we cover. Did we mention this, that you're actually wearing the sweater? You have a business, right? Wyoming.
Yeah, Wyoming based. Yeah,
Okay.
we can rattle off a few things, but yeah, Wyoming based. You can 100% wool beanies, sweaters. We have organic cotton hats too. Gonna try and come out more slowly over the next year, but love the beanie and the sweater. I pretty much live in this in the winter. That's wyomingbased.com. Daylightcomputer.com is our website. We're at Daylight Co on socials, so we're very active on socials. Any questions you have, feel free to DM us, or if you have any questions, you want to reach out, you're interested in brainstorming ideas or anything, podcasts, any type of partnership, hello@Daylight Computer is the best email. And then my personal socials, Tristan, or at Tristan_health on Instagram, and at Bitcoin and _beef on Twitter.
Okay, and you mentioning beef, just quickly, you have a book, right? And should I buy this book for my husband for Christmas?
Yeah. I think I lowered the price on Amazon. If not, I'll have to
Okay.
double check that. But yeah, it's called Bitcoin and Beef on Amazon. It's,
Yeah.
in my opinion, a great overview, introductory kind of lens into both Bitcoin and the issues with our food and financial systems, and why everything kind of comes back to money. And it's crazy that I wrote that 3 years ago, because now it all seems to be even more true and even more known about, which is amazing. So again, like, you put it out there and things start to happen. So I think it's a great intro for a lot of people, especially if you know any farmers or ranchers. And I think we need to educate as many people about Bitcoin, and trying to get outside of the system as much as possible.
Well, Tristan, it's my job to thank you. And I'll just start by saying, first of all, thank you for quantum entangling with us and this podcast, because we actually love your podcast, Decentralized Radio. And yeah, thank you for that podcast, because you've brought a lot of things to light. And thank you for persisting through 6 years or 5 years of electrical engineering and this concussion that you had and suffering through that, because sounds like the two of those things helped you bridge the gap between electromagnetism and health. And so many are still ignoring the inconvenient truth that you speak about, on that connection. So thank you for being such a strong advocate for decentralizing agricultural and monetary systems. we got more to learn because hopefully we'll have you back in 2025 and talk about Bitcoin on that. And just lastly, thank you for your role. Thank you for connecting with Anjan, but your role in, we think, changing the world for good, supporting the daylight computer, which is, really the first computer designed from the ground up to be circadian optimized. So thank you for all of that.
Thank you both. Really. I mean, it's always a pleasure to be able to speak what I'm passionate about, and you guys are doing an incredible job spreading this education and message to the world. And yeah, I'd be happy to come back and appreciate the opportunity to spread the message here.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to the Quantum Healthy podcast. We hope you found some value in this information. And if you feel inspired, please share it and leave us a 5-star review. This will help us reach so many more people. If you want to connect with Laura, you can find her at laurakistmanwellness.com and Ndia at ndiaray.com. Links are below in the show notes. Now, go find some sunlight and embrace your own quantum healthy.